All right, welcome to episode 6 of the Utah Stories podcast. My name is Rich Markosian, and if you're joining us for the first time, what the Utah Stories podcast is all about is protecting and preserving the free market. I believe strongly that the best thing we have going for us in the United States is our free market and our liberty, and I very much am about working to honor the traditions that made it possible for people to climb the socioeconomic ladder, for people to create their own wealth, to enjoy the spirit and the freedom of the West. And so basically, I've been publishing a magazine for the last 10 years, Utah Stories Magazine, and I'm getting into the whole podcasting arena because I see the opportunity to use this platform and this medium to explain things in a little more depth than what you get in the mainstream media, and to have greater understanding of the topics that especially affect our freedom and liberty. And when I see freedom and liberty under attack and tyranny basically taking over, I think that's the most important thing a journalist can do. And that's really what got me interested into journalism in the first place. And so in this episode, we're going to be looking at the compromise bill, the compromise for Proposition 2, which the voters passed, of course, passed in the Utah State Legislature. The governor just needs to sign it into law. We'll look at that, examine that, and basically we're going to go back to the beginning of how the church and their concern with monopolizing the buying public is really nothing new. This has been going on for many, many years, and we're going to go back and look at the economic history of downtown Salt Lake City. It was a project that actually kind of helped launch Utah Stories that I did back in 2006 and 7, and I want to show you what that looks like, what that project looked like in the Wayback Time Machine. I'm going to examine that. We're going to take a look at it. I think you're going to enjoy it, especially if you're interested in history, if you're interested in freedom and liberty and protecting the values that make the West and Utah a special place. And before I get into all that, I got to tell you about the Made in Utah Festival. So the Made in Utah Festival is hosted by Utah Stories Magazine. And we are having it at the Gateway between December 14th and the 16th. It's going to be an incredible event. It's full of 85 vendors, several of which are breweries and distilleries. You can actually come and shop and have a beer at the same time. It actually, totally out of the Utah body experience. There'll be a sound stage with live music from amazing bands. You'll be able to sample all of the best products made in Utah. And on Saturday and Sunday. On Friday, we're having our massive kickoff party where you buy a ticket for $40. You get to have 3 cocktails and sample food from downtown and area restaurants. Go check out madeinutahfest.com for all the details. I really think if you got to participate. If you're a locally minded, community minded person who likes to find the best local products at farmers markets or around the state, you got to come to this. It's going to be amazing. And so, yeah, with that, let's delve right into this because what I wanted to basically cover is Rocky Anderson and a group called Truce, which is the advocacy group for patients, decided to sue the LDS Church over what they're doing with Proposition 2 and the compromise bill, because according to the language of what Rocky Anderson wrote in his letter to the church, they are usurping the power and the voice of the people. And so let's look up, and I'll just show you really quick. And basically they're trying to say that what is going on is the quote by Rocky Anderson: anything that defeats the right of the people to pass their own legislation under our Constitution should be declared unconstitutional. Otherwise, it's totally illusory. And they basically focus in on whether or not the church can come in and usurp the power of the people. And I'm not a constitutional attorney. I can't pretend to be one. But I basically did some searching online, and I found that there's something called the lemon test to decide whether something is unconstitutional or not. And I found this little article that is 3 questions to decide if something violates the Establishment Clause. And what the Establishment Clause is it's the clause that separates the powers of the church and the state. And okay, this is the lemon test from lawshelf.com. Okay, the 3-part lemon test asks, does the law have a secular purpose? If not, it violates the Establishment Clause. That one's kind of hard to say yes to. Is the primary effect either to advance religion or inhibit religion? If so, it violates the Establishment Clause. So when I was explaining this to somebody I met on the street, he basically said to me, this is the church's ability to collect tithing whether you're Mormon or not. And I thought that was funny. He was obviously saying it in jest. But, I mean, it really is that. If the church is using taxpayer dollars to create a fascistic monopoly, which I contend it is, if you watch the previous episode, then basically the church is abusing the powers of the state to advance its own motives. And its motives are that they want to choose winners and losers. They want to be able to say, okay, if we like you, you get to have the permits and you get to have the right to grow medical marijuana. But if we don't like you, then you don't have the right. And the way the church using the state will have this central fill operate is that most of the places that distribute marijuana will be called medical cannabis pharmacies, which actually is an illegal term because you can't call something a pharmacy where you're not filling a prescription, and you cannot prescribe medical marijuana. You can only recommend it. So it's actually there's a violation there in the terminology they're using. They have to be dispensaries, not pharmacies, because we're not calling it a medicine because it's not regulated by the FDA. But anyway, the church is using the power of the state and the taxpayer dollars to create a central fill, which will control all of the distribution of medical cannabis. And if they deem somebody's product is unfit, they can basically not stamp it, and that cultivator could basically not be given the right to cultivate the product, which they're able to use all sorts of regulation to determine. And it just creates an entire environment which could be rife with corruption. And so the third question, does the law foster an excessive government entanglement with religion? If so, it violates the Establishment Clause. I believe very much it's entangled with government because when I asked Senator Vickers, who came up with the idea of the central fill, did you come up with this idea or did the church come up with this idea? He told me flat out, you're going to have to ask that question of the church. And so I think that that's pretty clear. I can infer that it is the church's idea. It's an entanglement, and it's in violation of the Establishment Clause. Okay, and so I want to go into, in this episode, how this is really nothing new. The church's attempt to monopolize the buying public, to monopolize a sector of the economy, is nothing new. And I'm going to go back and look at Utah Stories from the Wayback Time Machine. And the Wayback Machine is a really cool resource. It's basically an internet archive, and you're able to look at your website, how it looked in 2007 when we were working on this. Okay, so what we have here is a project I basically used to start Utah Stories. It was a people's history of Salt Lake City. Stories told by local merchants, a historian, a city planner, and newspaper archives. And I produced this in 2007, basically to satisfy my own curiosity and launch a website. And so it was an experiment where I talked to Tony Weller, John Sparrows, Bill Benyon, some of these people. Dick Wyrick owned Oxford Shoes for like 60 years downtown. He passed away. Bart Stringham is pretty much retired now. Doug Danzy, city planner, and Alan Barnett, a historian. I'm not going to go into the detail of this. I'm just going to do really quick overview of what this was, go back to the Wayback Machine and check this out. And I'll tell you what the purpose of this was, and I'll give you the conclusion. We'll just do that in the next 5-10 minutes, because I realize you got to keep these podcasts tight. And so let's go first to the Great Divide, part 1. So basically what was going on was downtown Salt Lake City was always divided between the Mormons on the north end of Main Street and the non-Mormons who were on the south end of Main Street. It was always kind of a divided city. It was always a silver mining boom town, and a lot of people came to Utah to take advantage of the silver mining that was going on. And of course, the Mormons came here to take advantage of freedom and escape basically the mobs that were killing so many Mormons in the previous cities they'd been to. On the south side of Main Street, 300 South, by 1939, this massive, amazing department store had grown incredibly huge called Auerbach's. And Auerbach's was Utah's most popular department store. So unusual for even that time, many Mormons loved Auerbach's. It was a very, very beautiful department store. They really knew how to take care of customers. It was modeled after department stores back in New York and Chicago. And Fred Auerbach was just a master at creating one of the most amazing businesses in downtown Salt Lake City. And it totally was flourishing even by 1939. And that was a big ad they took out in the Salt Lake Tribune at the time. And it was just a local institution, and people loved it. And so taking a look at downtown by 1955, we see 12 independently owned jewelry shops. We had Wolf Sporting Goods, Broadway Music, Baker Shoes. So tons of local economic activity from longtime local business owners who actually own the buildings they operated out of. And I find that to be very important. If you're a business owner and you're able to own the business, the building that you operate under, you have a lot more power and sovereignty. And then on the other end of Main Street, you had the Z Cmi Center. And ZCMI dates back to all the way back when the pioneers first arrived. And they were basically wanted to create a Zion cooperative mercantile interchange, or incorporated. I believe that's what it stands for. I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong. And so ZCMI was owned basically by the private arm of the Mormon Church, Zion Securities, and it became its own department store and its own rival to Auerbach's. And ZCMI church members were basically ordered to shop at ZCMI. They had to spend their dollars at ZCMI so that they would be supporting the business interests of the church. And so what happened by 1960s was downtown started to see some urban decay, urban blight. And that was really caused by the massive growth of the suburbs. And it wasn't just down in downtown Salt Lake City, it was really all over the entire nation. Urban decay, white flight, and urban blight was really happening on a massive scale. And so what did the city decide to do? They didn't know at first what to do. They thought beautification projects would be great. They saw the success of the amazing Cottonwood Mall, which was the first mall to be built west of the Mississippi. They saw the success of Kmart, which was a huge department store. And so downtown, they decided to turn ZCMI into a mall like they had in the suburbs. And it doesn't seem like too bad of an idea. I mean, if everybody's going to the suburbs because there's malls, is indoor shopping and easier parking, then why not? And so here we had two different opposing views. One man thinking the malls were a terrible idea, one man thinking the mall was a great idea. And so basically you saw the continued decline of the street. And I believe it was 1968 or 9, they started considering to build a mall in downtown. This was all about the streets decaying. And okay, so here you see the beginning of ZCMI planning a multi-million-dollar expansion, and now they're going to take over this entire block. And you can see the parking at that time was 45-degree angle. ZCMI was just this one beautiful building right across from the Joseph Smith building, which at that time was the Hotel Utah. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And so Zion Security stepped in and decided to create the mall, and this was in, get this date correct. Gosh, I'm pretty sure it was right in the early 1970s. And right after the ZCMI was built, you started seeing these businesses start to go under. And this was how they destroyed this Constitution building to build the Crossroads Mall. And the Crossroads Mall was started in 1978. Then they wanted to build a tunnel connecting the malls, exactly where the tunnel connecting the City Creek Center is located right now. That was torpedoed at that time. Okay, and then 1979, you saw Auerbach's close. That amazing department store I told you about. After 114 years of being in business in downtown Salt Lake City, Auerbach's closes. It's a massive shock. Not really, I don't think, to the people in the LDS Church who were basically doing what they could to keep everybody on the north end, the Mormon end of Main Street. And then you saw more local giants close down. Keith Warshaw, Wolf's Ranchwear, Wolf Sporting Goods, huge other companies such as Paris Company, and basically the entire south end of Main Street was collapsing, and they were trying to figure out what to do about that. And their solution was to just build another mall. Let's open up another mall on the south end. And to me, it just kind of, you look back on this and you're like, how in the world did they decide that this would be a good idea? How was this trading off of basically Auerbach's for Nordstrom? Auerbach's was probably just as strong as Nordstrom when they allowed Nordstrom to be in the Crossroads Mall. Why was that considered a good trade? Why should we just put our local institutions out of business? And that was the question of this investigation. And the conclusion is, with all the work the city did to so-called help the small business owners, they widened the sidewalks, they created beautification projects to get more people to go to the south end of the street. Everything they did actually backfired. It made things worse. When they built the widening sidewalks, they put up giant, huge piles of dirt right in front of the storefronts of these business owners for a year and a half. They couldn't survive. And so the conclusion is, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language any small business owner can hear are, I'm from the government and I am here to help. The government has done nothing but harm for the business owners in downtown Salt Lake City. It was a real terrible trade-off that we lost so many amazing local businesses to the malls and to the chain stores that are in the malls. And basically, that's what happened. And so I'm going to tell you what happened in the modern day after I tell you a little bit more about what's in this issue of Utah Stories. I wanted to tell you that we did a really cool project for the first time. So we always have this holiday shopping guide in Utah Stories, and it allows people to learn how to buy from local independent businesses and where they can go, who they are. And this is all about Broadway. This is really still the local area of downtown. You can go to Antoinette's and buy amazing antique jewelry. You can go to Boutique, Fellow Shop, and this is called QED Style. It's a new local boutique. And so we did something new where we took out our amazing photographer, Young, and took some portraits of these amazing business owners who are in Sugar House. And like, this is Chris and Bob. Chris is a really incredible watchmaker, watch repair person. Bob has a shop that's like a museum when you walk in. It's full of these coins, and the coins really go into some of the history of the Utah pioneers. He has pioneer script there. Really cool shop to go into. Red Moose Cafe has these incredible breakfast burritos. Pibbs Exchange has the best ugly Christmas sweater collection you'll find anywhere in Utah. I would consider even driving up to Pibbs, even if you live in St. George, because they get the very best ugly Christmas sweaters there. Yeah, and I just encourage you to go pick this up or subscribe to Utah Stories Magazine at utahstories.com. And so with that, I want to just finish up what happened after the malls were built. Was it a good idea to build Crossroads Mall across the street from the ZCMI Center? And what we found from basically 1980 to 1995 or so, the malls were great. They were doing wonderful, kicking butt. And then something happened in the consumer mindset where it just was too big of a pain to go downtown. And the Cottonwood Mall was better. The Fashion Place Mall was better. People just didn't want to go to shop downtown in malls when we already had malls in the suburbs. And so the malls started losing tenants, and the Main Street was already, suffering greatly. So in 2001, when it was decided, I think it was actually 1998, it was found out we were going to be hosting the Olympics in Utah in 2002. The city planners decided we had to do something about our ugly Main Street. We had to have a place where we could host the world for our Olympics, and it could not be on our Main Street because Main Street was just too damn ugly. And so they decided to build a giant mall 5 blocks to the west of Main Street, and they decided to call it Gateway. And so the Gateway Mall, this outdoor life center, it was really a nice place right from the get-go. People loved it. Lots of crowds, went there to do their shopping. I never personally thought it was that cool, but it got a lot of foot traffic and people really liked it. But that did not help Main Street, of course, at all. What happened with Main Street is that people just left it in droves, and then Main Street, even more of it was boarded up. And then they decided they just had to close the Crossroads Mall. There weren't enough tenants, so they closed it. That was a church-owned property. And then across the street, it was obvious, too, that the Z Cmi Center also had to close. And so the problem was, what do you have right across the street from the mall? The Crossroads Mall, you have Temple Square. And Temple Square obviously attracts, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 million visitors a year. It's a huge tourist attraction. It's one of the most incredibly architecturally interesting buildings I think you can find anywhere. It's just an incredible place to see, and built by Mormon pioneers. Took them like 50 years to build, but they could not have all this blight right across the street from their beautiful mall, from their beautiful temple. So basically the church decided they needed to tear down these malls and build something better, more spectacular than even Gateway. They had to do something to get the tenants out of Gateway and into church-owned property. And so the church decided they were going to build the City Creek Center. And basically the City Creek Center is a estimated $2 billion project, which the Zion Securities financed, and they partnered with Taubman Centers, which is a national mall developer, so they can ensure that they would be able to fill this thing up with tenants and that they could lure away all of these wonderful folks from the Gateway. And remember, the Gateway was basically just built to host the Olympics, and the church just wanted their money back. And so they attracted, if I can find on here, stores, all stores. Let's just look at the stores that are in the City Creek Center right now and how many of them actually came out of the Gateway. I know they took the Apple store. That was the biggest one. I can't say that I know if they took Anthropology, they might have taken that one. Banana Republic is a yes. They took, oh, come to look at it, I can't say that a ton of these. Forever 21, I believe, came from the Gateway. The Gap came from the Gateway. H&M was new. They got some jewelry stores. Who? Aldo shoes came from Gateway. Golda says, yeah, Anthropology. Morgan Jewelers, they used to be in the Gateway. Nordstrom was originally in the Crossroads Mall, and the reason why the City Creek Center got the go-ahead was Nordstrom decided they would occupy the City Creek Center if they built it. That's their big anchor. Yeah, and Sephora is new. I mean, they got a bunch of new tenants as well. But the main thing I gotta say I don't like about the City Creek Center is the crown jewel of the City Creek Center, the greatest restaurant presence, is the Cheesecake Factory. It's like, really, that's the very best we can do in Salt Lake in terms of showing the world our restaurants, is the Cheesecake Factory. And that really represents for me why I don't like this. Why not have a locally owned business be the crown jewel of the City Creek Center? Why not support the local economy? Why should the church be essentially deciding all of these chain stores get a win and all the local businesses get to lose? Why should we allow that? I just don't think it's right, and I think that the cultural blowback is the following. It's like, I have 4 grandparents. 3 of them come from Mormon pioneer ancestry. And so I really wonder about what brought my pioneer ancestors here in the first place. Why did they go from England, which is this beautiful island, plenty of rainfall, to the desert where there's so little rainfall? We get like 3 inches of rainfall a year in Utah. It's really hard to grow things. It was considered, before the pioneers came out here, to be like bad lands and wasted space, and nobody could live out here. And obviously, my ancestors came from England to come over here, and the only reason I can really understand that they would do that is that they wanted to have and enjoy the opportunity to build their own destiny, to grow their own crops on the 200 acres or whatever it was they were given, grow their plants, grow their wealth, and be self-sufficient, self-reliant, and create something new without economic tyranny. Because what I know about England at that time is that the House of Lords is an entire member of the group in the Parliament, and the Lords were really the landowners. And the Lords owned so much of the land that so many people were unable to own land of their own. So to have the opportunity of ownership really was not that great. Climbing the economic spectrum, economic ladder, and improving your lot in life was not an easy thing to do back then. And so to be able to come to the Great Basin Kingdom, even if you had to basically live under the power and authority of a theocracy and Brigham Young, was a great prospect for you and your family, and you had the opportunity to create a better life for your family. And so now the church basically wanting to centralize their power and monopolize the power in real world terms, I think has caused people like myself and a lot of my cousins to just be like, this is not what a church is supposed to be about. I mean, the City Creek Center is right across the street from the temple, and the church owns all that property and all the mall property. When the money changers were out in front of the temple, what did Jesus do? He turned over their tables. He showed them that he was rejecting that idea, that there should be commerce happening in the same space as the matters that involve eternal principles and spirituality. And so basically, I think a lot of members and former members are getting disenchanted with what the church is doing, especially as it relates to medical cannabis, because Our simple ability to put a seed in the ground and grow and enjoy the fruit of our labor, to be able to reap what we sow in both real world terms and in our gardens, is a basic right we should be able to enjoy. And for the church to come in and tell us, hey, you cannot grow this plant, and even though it's obvious that cannabis has been a domesticated crop used by humans for thousands and thousands of years, it's always been a staple of human tradition and society. And when it was prohibited, it was the big moneyed interest at the time that were involved in demonizing medical cannabis and hemp, because mostly William Randolph Hearst was owning tons of forest land and producing is using the forest land to produce paper pulp for all of his magazines and newspapers, and he saw a way, an opening to secure his profits. And he, along with magnates from Dow Chemical, saw the opportunity to demonize hemp and hemp production, and thus prohibit it from people being able to grow it, and stop the growth and flourishment of a competing agricultural product that can make a huge difference in the marketplace. And so, whether you're Mormon or non-Mormon, I think you should agree that the ideal to keep a fair, free market is the highest ideal we should try to maintain, especially living out here in the West. It's why we came out here. It's a whole reason why our ancestors arrived here. It's all solely for the purpose of freedom. And so, with that, I am going to wrap up this 6th episode of the Utah Stories podcast. And thank you so much for your comments. And I really love reading what you guys have had to say about this series. I think this will probably kind of wrap up the medical cannabis series of episodes. We're going to be getting more into other issues of freedom. I have a lot to tell you about the decline of local media. I'm going to be getting into that, where I'm talking to some pretty important people in the local media landscape. And we'll be starting that series next week. So be sure you subscribe to the channel. And basically, your subscription, you are sharing this on Facebook, sharing it with a friend, is the only way I'm really promoting this podcast right now. I don't feel like I want to really blow it up, because as you can see, I still need to learn how to speak. I'm used to writing. And but I'd still very much appreciate it if you'd share this program with your friends. And let's secure our freedom and liberty so we have prosperity, continued prosperity here in Utah. That's the mission value of Utah Stories magazine. And we hope you come out to our Made in Utah Festival. Be sure to mark your calendars for December 14th for the kickoff party. You can get those tickets at madeinutahfest.com, and December 15th and 16th, Saturday and Sunday, for the main festival inside of 23,000 square feet of the Gateway. So Gateways, ended up being largely vacated thanks to the efforts of the LDS Church. However, we are bringing the locals back to downtown, local makers at the Made in Utah Festival, and you'll be able to enjoy 90 local vendors. So bring and shift your spending back to local and support the local economy by coming to the Made in Utah Festival. With that, thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.